Welcome everyone. My name is Manny Castro. I'm the Technical Services Specialist here at Siegel Scientific, and today we'll be covering data entry forms in BarTender 2016. So now, data entry forms now include the ability to place data entry prompts, query prompts, and record selectors all on the same form, and the ability to use multiple forms in a single document. So now in this session, you'll learn how to create and design data entry forms to most effectively enter data and select records to print on your label. This does include going into the BarTender Designer user interface as well. So let's go ahead and get started. So before we actually start uh, talking about how to design a data entry form, let's just talk about what a data entry form is in BarTender. So a data entry form is a dialog that displays at print time that allows you to pick or enter data to print on your label. And also now you have the ability to search for and select records to print. This allows you to have a dynamic label with the data that you need to print, and you can choose all this on the fly at print time. You can design or you can customize your data entry form as well. So without having to, this can be the what's actually seen by your end user without having to actually fumble through around the actual BarTender designer. A data entry form has controls, which we see is like any object that we create on the data entry form. And those controls, at least the ones that you can populate data or select data to, are usually linked back to objects on your label. For example, you can populate a barcode or a text object and select the record that you want to print from your database. Additionally, you can also make changes such as changing the color or changing the size and inserting images to make this data entry form completely yours and easy for your print operator to utilize. So all the available controls are kind of broken up into a few different types of controls in the data entry form when we look in the user interface. So we're going to kind of split those up and we're going to begin by covering the database record controls. So a database record control allows you to search for and select records to print. So this is actually displaying or giving you a view into the database that you have connected to your BarTender document when you were designing that label itself. So when you went into file and database connection setup and configured that connection to that database, that is what's showing here, and that's the record that you're selecting to print. You don't necessarily have to use a query prompt anymore. You can use one of these record pickers that we have available. So now let's go ahead and I'm going to exit out of this, and I have a few labels pre-made, and for the sake of simplicity and just to keep on time, I've actually made the connection ahead of time. So what I've done is I've created a simple little label here. I've connected it to a database. So if we look into our database connection setup, we see that we have all our data there. And I've then linked objects like the barcode to fields that are in my database that I've connected. So now at this point, traditionally what you would do is you would either set a query prompt in the database connection setup, or in the print dialog, whenever you go to print, you go to select the records to print, right? Well, now what we can do is if we go to the bottom left-hand corner of the label design, we'll see by default we have what's called Form 1 now. And here, I've actually ahead of time already inserted an image. This is not there by default, but you're able to insert or not insert any image there. That's just what I did ahead of time. But now what we can do is we can create any controls here. So just a quick or a quick mention on the UI here. Whenever you're going to create a control or create an image or a whatever it may be, what you want to do is you want to click on the icon up at the top in the toolbar where it says Data Entry Control. That drop down is going to come down, and from there you can select any of the controls that are going to be on your data entry form. So for this particular scenario, since we're talking about the database controls, or the database record controls, we're going to go ahead and select Record Picker. we're going to notice that our cursor changes, and we see that we now have a little view into our database. If we click on the foreground or on the background of the data entry form, we'll notice the green bar is highlighted around. What we can do is we can actually drag and resize this data entry form to make it fit our needs. Clicking once on the record picker does the same thing where we're able to resize it. So now from there, we haven't really made any changes. We haven't done anything special. All we did was design our label, connect our label to a database, and then we created this database record picker. So if we just were to go to print preview right now, our default behavior would be to just allow us to search. So we can search for any value. And we see whatever meets that criteria is now shown. And we see that we can highlight and we can click the records that we want to pick. After that, we select the first and last one, let's just say, and we hit preview, and we see that we have two labels available. So this makes it easier to just select the records that you need to print. You no longer have to do a query prompt. So now we have the record picker there. We are able to actually customize it as well. So if we double click our record picker, and all I did there was cancel out of the print preview, we go into the properties of that record picker. Now if we look for, or if we select the record picker option on the left, and on the right, some of the highlights or the options to mention is, for example, the search bar up at the top, we can hide that. So you can't search the database if that's what's needed, and you can show the filter row option. And what that means is the search control actually searches like a wildcard your whole database. The filter row option actually only searches that particular field that you have selected. You're also able to sort by, just select the field that you want to sort by. So for example, if you want them to be sorted by first name, for example, we notice that it automatically throws them into alphabetical order there according to the first name. Going into the columns section there, we see that we can remove any fields that we don't think are necessary. So if this is too much clutter or it's just too much information, the end user probably doesn't need to know or see the zip or any of the other information. Maybe they just need these columns that we have selected here. As you see, as we start removing them or we start deleting them, the options disappear from the actual record picker there. So what this does is it lets you simplify it instead of having to display your whole database. You also have appearance, column, and layout options. So you're able to customize what these columns look like. So you can change the background color of your columns if that's what you need. So for example, if that first name is very important or we want a relative attention to that field or column for whatever reason, or these are color coded, you're able to do that as well. If we go down to the font option on the left, you're able to go through and select different font sizes and also change the font type of this dialog. So if we are limited on space or anything like that, you can make it as small or as big as you'd like, and we can make it whatever font works best for your particular end user. So let's go ahead and delete this control here. I'm just gonna hit the delete button on the keyboard. Okay, and next we're going to go ahead and create a drop-down record picker. So if we go ahead and create that and place it on our label format, and let's go ahead and print preview. We'll notice that clicking on the drop-down shows us all the available fields in our database. However,
Where I see that the drop-down record picker is a little bit more useful, or how it can be used more effectively, is by kind of getting rid of all the extra things that we don't need in there. And by that I mean is removing the fields that we don't really use. So if we go into the properties of the drop-down record picker, we can go to columns, and we can delete any of the records that we don't want to show up at print time. So let's go ahead and delete everything but email. And then we'll close it out, and we'll try to print preview again, and we'll notice that we have a little bit of a different view now. At this point, we only see the relevant, or the records that we actually selected. Let's select Chris and let's print preview. And then we see that we bring in only his information. So let's go ahead and continue forward. I'm going to go ahead and delete this. And let's go ahead and close out all these extra labels.
That concludes our section on the record picker controls there. Jasper, was there any questions as far as that goes?
Okay, looks like the first question we got here is, when you delete columns from the record picker view, does it also take it out of the search bar, eliminating it from being searched?
That is correct. So what's going to happen there is whatever columns you select to show up in your record picker are going to be the values that you have available to search from. So if you have a third or fourth field available, let's just say, that you need that contains data that you're going to search for, then you'll just want to make sure that it contains it within that record picker when you're creating that one.
So the next thing we're going to cover is general controls available when designing a data entry form. So some of the general controls available are text input box, drop-down list, word processor. This is a much more diverse family of controls. You'll see that you have quite a few more options available. So from here, we'll just go ahead and jump right back into the BarTender Designer and check out how these new controls work. We're going to pay attention to specifically the text input box that now has the autocomplete option and a database connection that we can make from within. And the drop-down list behaves similarly, where you can make a database connection from the drop-down list and use that as part of your data selection. And that's not associated with the database that you've connected to your label. So let's go ahead and see how that actually works in practice. So here we have about the same label, just with a few changes made on it. We have all the fields on the label format look like this, and the reason it looks like that when we open that up is because I've actually created a query prompt for this particular label format. So if we go to the filter option here, we actually get prompted to enter a state. So that's why we see that option there. And this is how you create a query prompt now in BarTender 2016. So let's go ahead and delete this one, and let's just create it one more time. So we're going to go into the file and then database connection setup. We're going to select the plus icon, so that adds a section to our filter. We're going to select the field that we want to query, and then we're going to select the operator as equals. That's fine. And then similar behavior to in the past, we're either going to select a value that we actually want to filter it by, or we're going to select new query prompt. Since we already have one created here, the one that I created, we're going to go ahead and select the query prompt number 1 there. And we now are able to search for, let's see if that's a valid one. We're now able to search for that state via that query prompt. So now that behavior, as far as how the queries work, functions very much the same. But now where there's some new functionality is that we can now take all that and bring it into our form. So here we see that we have a query prompt up at the top and a standard prompt at the bottom. So behavior-wise, let's go ahead and just print preview so that we can see what this looks like. So we're able to, instead of actually having a two-step print process, instead we have all this in one easy to fill out form. So we select the state, and then this is just your standard user prompt that's not associated with your label format at all. And then we hit preview. And then we see that all the data from our database has come in. And then at the bottom, we have that just the random text object that I've inserted so that you can, and not associated with your database that's connected with your label. So now I'm going to go ahead and delete that and show you how easy it is to create this. So I'm just going to click on it and hit delete on my keyboard. Going back to the template, just as a refresher, all that we've done here is we've designed our label format just as we've always done in BarTender, using the toolbar to create objects. And then we connected to that database. We created a query prompt. And then we've linked the objects on our label back to those database fields. Okay, so that all looks pretty normal. So now this is where it actually gets kind of exciting. So this is just a text input box, not a text input box. This is just a text object, just there to make things easy to read. Now, if we look on the left over here on our toolbar, we now see an option that says query prompts. So now, instead of getting prompted as a two-step process, what we can do is we can drag and drop that query prompt that we just created in our database connection setup and insert it into our data entry form. So by dragging and dropping, I get this dialog here that we see. So pretty much what it's asking now is we now have all these options. So if you need a drop-down list like we saw there, and you want that to be your query prompt, as in that's what's selecting what record to print, you're now able to do that. And you also have your traditional text input box as well. So let's just go ahead and select that drop-down list again. We now see that it's created. Clicking on it, we don't see the option here to actually select what field we're querying, and that's because this is a query prompt and we selected that, or we already said what field we're going to search for in the database connection setup. So we can close out of that, and that's finished. And then on the left there we have that sample text box, and that's just at the bottom right hand corner here. This object here, and it's not connected to anything, it's just your standard embedded data source. So now let's go ahead and do the same thing there on our form, where we drag and we drop, and then we're able to select from the same options. So let's just say text input box. And we now see our text input box come up. If we go to print preview, let's test everything out, make sure that we created it all correctly. We'll see that first we do have to complete our query. So let's just select what query, or excuse me, what field we want the value for our query, excuse me. And then we'll type in some data and just hit preview. And then we'll see that this is a test at the bottom, and our data has come in just how we had it before. Now, one thing on that drop-down there, that drop-down list is a little large. So what we can do is, and let me look for the option. Trying to, oh, sorry, it's right there. So here we can actually say how many lines we're going to show. So since we now set it to 10, let's go ahead and try that print preview one more time, and that should be a little bit easier. Oops. That should be a little bit easier to use instead of that drop-down list going across the screen. So now we have our drop-down list that we've created, and this is the query prompt. and then the data, and then we can preview. And then as we see there, the same exact behavior. So it's really that easy to make your data entry form now will all be into this one step print process if that's what's needed there. So something else, we're continuing on with that. If we dig into this text input box. So now remember, this text input box is just your normal text input box that you're used to creating and using, and you've just linked it to a data source that's on your label format. One of the options by double clicking on that text input box is autocomplete. So we can enable autocomplete and we can set it to previously entered values, and pretty much it just keeps a running tally as to what data is entered. So this is per user per label that we keep track of this. So as long as it's the same user, the same label, you're able to recall any previously entered values. So now moving forward from there and continuing on from there, the other option that I want to cover is the database connection setup. So now what this is it allows you to make a database connection that's independent of the label format, select a field from that database to populate the autocomplete. So let's go ahead and do that real quick so we can see what that looks like. So let's just select an Excel file. We'll browse and we'll select this Excel file that we have here. So now we see it there, and this connection, again, independent and different from the connection that we made in our label format. So now we can hit OK there, and we can select what field is going to populate our suggestions. So let's just say email, just for fun. We're going to hit print preview again. We're going to complete our query prompt. So this is selecting what record from our database is going to print. And then we can start typing here. And if we see, it starts giving us suggestions. So, and this is just going to be embedded data on the label format. It has nothing else to do with what else is in that particular database that we selected. We can just print preview, and this is, just imagine like you just typed it in all on yourself, except that we now have that assistance or that added option where you can select that autocomplete and it behaves in that manner. If we delete this, we can also, and then just do the drag and drop again, we can also do the drop-down list as well. So these are both drop-downs, but they're going to behave a little bit differently. So now this is we're going to do. We're going to double-click on the drop-down, and the source, we can do embedded data, so we can type in all the different values that we have. But let's say you have a scenario where you have and I've seen it many times where you have a lot of different options available. So a lot of different scenarios for your drop-down list, and I've seen that it can get very daunting to take it from label to label when you're just trying to get a behavior as I have this in an Excel file or I have it in a tab delimited file somewhere. I just want that to be my drop-down list. So now you can do that. So again, we have a database connection set up independent of the label format, and let's connect to that same database. So there we have our database that we're connected to. So this is now connected to a database and it's independent of the label. And then we can select what drop-down list we're going to display. So let's go ahead and see if we did everything correctly there. And I do want to make one quick change. And set this to, let's say, 10. So we can make it look easy to use. So we'll hit print preview again, and then we'll have our two drop downs. So it's It's not highlighted by default because first we have to select any query that we have going on. So the query prompt has been completed. We've selected the record to print. So now we can select what value is going to be inserted into that text object at the bottom of our label. So now these values here are being brought in from that database that we connected to on the data entry form. It has nothing to do with this query prompt here. This is a separate database and it can be in a different platform if you want. So you could have a SQL server populating your label and you can have a autocomplete or a drop-down list, for example, and it can be sourced from a text file or an Excel file, for example. So we go ahead and select the value and we hit print preview and there's our label there. Same behavior as before, static data at the bottom, and then all the database information is at the top. Okay, so now if there's any questions as far as general controls goes, I'll go ahead and let Jasper read off any questions that we may have.
Okay, next question we got here is, can you set a default value for the query prompt to save the value entered and use it as a default value for the next time?
You are actually able to set a default value for your query prompt. So you're not going to do that when you're designing the data entry form. However, you're going to do that when you're creating the query in the database connection setup. So that's going to be located under File and Database Connection Setup in BarTender. And then that's when you'll create and assign that default value.
For the autocomplete feature, where are the values stored?
So those values are actually stored in the registry for that particular user. So whenever we store those autocomplete features, it's per user, per document, and per control. So if you ever want to clear that history or clear that value, you would just open up the properties of that control in the data entry form and hit the icon to clear that value. Otherwise, though, if let's just say we do have a scenario where you're sharing labels from one user to another, if I were to send somebody a label, they're not going to have the same autocomplete that I have available because that autocomplete is actually in my registry, not in theirs. So that's how that would function.
Can you have multiple query prompts?
You are able to have multiple query prompts. So you would just create them and keep creating them just how you created the first one. And if you want them on the data entry form, you would actually just continue on with the same process of dragging and dropping the query onto the form and then select what type of control you would like to create for it.
Can a selection in one dropdown be dependable on the selection previously made in another dropdown?
You can't necessarily relate them based on the different controls, but what you can do though is that's when you get into the area of using multiple forms if needed. So if you have a condition like that where let's say you have a label and one is by pounds and one is by quantity, clicking on the drop down and selecting that pounds or that quantity can dictate what kind of form is going to show up after that one. So in that scenario, what I would do is actually use the multiple forms feature. So I did want to go ahead and cut off Jasper there. We'll go ahead and continue on with the rest of the session, and we'll make another stop, and we'll make sure that the rest of the questions get answered there.
So BarTender's data sources can be formatted to be date and time as well. So what this means is, for example, you can have an object on your label like a barcode or a text object that's linked to the clock on your printer or linked to the clock on your Windows machine. And what that does is it lets you have the correct time. So, every time you print, at the time of print, we give it a timestamp, and then you can use that in that manner. And then also it's used for things like offset. So now if in the scenario where the end user is actually going to know what date they need to pick or what data or excuse me, what date or time needs to be printed on the label format, we also have controls available that behave in the same manner where you can select the date and time or whatever it may be, and that's what's going to print on your label format. And you also have options as well on the data source level to format these. So if it should be in a certain format or even a custom format, and I mean like a date format, for example, you're able to set that in the data source, and then at print time you will have these controls here that will populate your label. So I'm going to go ahead and keep going through these next few sections, and then we're going to finish up with kind of using the last of these controls that we have towards the end of the session here. So uh, we move on to data capture. So what data capture is it allows you to get inputs from sources other than just your traditional keyboard scanner or clicking on a mouse. So what that means is you're able to connect a scale to your machine, and as long as you configure it in BarTender, you're able to then capture the data that's on that scale, or if you have a compatible camera, for example, you're able to get an image or take a picture at print time and then place it, like for example, on an ID card or a membership card of some sort if that's what's needed. Aside from data entry as well, we have some other objects that you're able to create, and that's just to customize the look of your data entry form. So here we see on the right, it's a bit of a radical design, but uh, you're able to organize it in this fashion. So for example, there we see that we've changed the color of the background, and that we've selected, or that we've put boxes around list 1 and list 2, and you can actually that actually helps control the tab order. So if you're in a scenario where you're using the tabs, or excuse me, where a end user is tabbing through this print dialog, and you need to isolate these sections, I just said list 1, list 2 there, but you're able to do that with the box groupings. And then you have your basic functionality such as creating lines, shapes, and so you can insert a star or whatever may be needed, or an arrow as we see there on the right. And if you have a specific image that should be set as the background, you can select that image as well. So if there's a particular format or something that will aid in helping the end user easier fill out the form, you're able to set that when you're designing your data entry form. This is what I was mentioning just a little bit ago there, that we're now able to create multiple forms. This is useful if you have a requirement for a multi-step print process. Kind of like what was asked earlier there, what we can do now is based on the information or what's going on the first form, we can either go to form number 2 or go to form number 3, or we can just skip form 2 and 3 altogether, and we can just go straight to printout. So for example, like let's say we have something like a tomato that's weighed by the pound, or excuse me, a tomato that's weighed by quantity. So you have 3 tomatoes. You're probably not going to need a scale for that. But if you have something else that is being weighed by the pound, for example, let's say potatoes, you can actually set the potatoes on the scale, and because of the conditions that you set in the multi-forms there, with the multiple forms, you can actually dictate if that form is going to show up or not. So let's go ahead and jump back into BarTender there, and we'll kind of wrap all these controls that we just mentioned very quickly there, and we'll put them to use. Okay, so here we have, again, just to keep it consistent there, we have like the same label format. So we have our query prompt, so where we select the state and we enter data. But let's say that we want to use or put to use that date picker that we mentioned. So what we can do here is we can change this data source type. So all I did was double click on that sample text data source, and I can actually delete this and recreate it for simplicity. Okay, so we have just our sample there, and we can just drag and drop the clock on the left that we see there. So now if we double click on it and we go into the properties, we see that this now is a clock data source. And we could have changed it from here as well, but we just kind of drag and dropped it instead. On the data type, this is where you can select what the data type is going to be, but as well as the format. So if we need a, let's go down and look at something. So if we need this kind of style format, so where we just have the full date, the full month and the date, we can select that, and then we can even go into custom. So there's scenarios where customers or companies, they need a particular format, and it has to be in that format, and it's not so traditional. So this is where you would set that up at this point. So now we have that there. Now, this isn't going to change. We haven't really populated it yet there. So what we're going to do is we're going to populate it at print time using our data entry form. So because we're a little tight on space, we're going to expand this down. I'm going to copy and paste this line, create a duplicate just so we can separate things out. And then on the left there, I'm going to find my clock data source that I just created. We're going to drag and drop it, and we're going to set it to a month calendar. We want to pick what month and day that's going to print out on, or what data that's going to, or what month and date is going to print out on the label. So there we have our month record picker. We'll go ahead and print preview. We can now do our query prompt. Select, and I think we don't have anything linked on. Yeah, we deleted that one. We don't have anything linked, so that's why this one isn't highlighted there. So then we can select the date that is going to print on the bottom of the label, and then we'll see January 22, which is the date that we selected there. So now let's go ahead and close that out. Let's delete this one since we're not using that. And let's attempt to use a second form. So let's say we have, this is a shipping label all of a sudden, and we also need not just the date that it's going to get there, but also how heavy is this package. So let's create a single line. We're going to double click on it. We have our sample text there. Let's just say, okay. And let's make the font a little smaller. And then let's add another data source. I'm just going to make this 01 for now, just so that it looks nice on the label. And let's set this to number on the data type. So now what we've done there, to recap really quick, we've created a text object. We have an embedded data that says package weight, and it's just static data. It's not going to be populated from any external or messed with by anything else. And then we have this other embedded data source, which is just going to be the weight. So now what we want to do is, let's say we have that scale that we want to use, and we want to put that on another form. So what we'll want to do is we'll want to click on Administer, and then Weighing Scale Setup. And then you'll select, or you'll see if we have any scales set up at that point. If you don't, you'll have to go through the wizard and actually select the scale that you have, or the type of scale that you have. So for example, if I delete this rice leg TP scale that I have here, let's go ahead and just select it again. And these settings are going to change based on the type of scale that you have, how you have it connected. But the principle stays the same, that you just want to make sure that you got the right settings on here. So we've connected to the scale there that we have. We're going to hit OK. And at this point, let's go ahead and put this on a second form. Let's make this that, let's use that whole process that we can have multiple forms now. Let's find on the left there on our data sources, we're going to try to find where we created that package weight. We're going to drag and drop the number 1 because that's going to be our scale display. We're going to select scale display and hit create. And there we have our scale. So now that may not be the kind of scale that we want to use, right? Or the kind of visual that we want to use. So we can go ahead and double click on that and we can change the appearance. So let's just use something digital and let's change the color. Okay, and let's change the weight units. And then we close that out. Let's start a test there, make sure that we're getting data. Okay, and it looks like it's working there. Okay. So now what we can do is we've created this multi-step process, and in a second we'll come back and I'll show you how we can conditionally print that. And let's go ahead and just print preview. Let's see what our label looks like now. So this is what the print operator is going to see. They're not going to have to go in and fumble around in the designer and click into the particular objects or guess at the weight or anything like that, because we have all this configured. So we're going to select the state, and this is going to be selecting what record actually prints, because we're connected to the database. So this is, we're going to select the date. We're going to hit next. It's going to connect to our scale real quick. And then we see our scale there. Okay, we see the weight moving around, and then we're going to preview once we're ready. And we might have missed something there. Let's go ahead and check back on why our package weight didn't show up. Let me check my form again, make sure it's connected. Okay, yeah, so perhaps we want that on text. Let me double check on that. Let's go ahead and try to print preview again. We have our weight there. And there we see our weight in pounds. So this package weighs 0.2 pounds. So we've created that format. So now let's go back and let's actually look into the properties of this form. So at the bottom there we have form 1 and form 2. Right now by default, every time you go to print or print preview, as we have been doing, it actually goes through the whole process, so it goes through form 1 and form 2. So now if we need to conditionally print, so for like the question that was asked earlier there, where we have a scenario where let's say the only package that needs weights are the one that are going to Louisiana. All I did was I double clicked on the foreground of the data entry form. I clicked on the name of the form up there, and by the way, you can change these for simplicity purpose. And then we're going to change when it says show when. So now this is where you can actually build your condition. So what we're going to do is we're going to look for state, and we want it to only show up for Louisiana, which is the LA, the abbreviation there. So let's go ahead and close that out. Let's hit print preview, and let's select something else that's not Louisiana. Let's see if we did that correctly. So now we should not see, we don't get that package weight. And another step that we'll probably want to do is conditionally print this as well. So just quickly to cover on that, it's in the same location as well. So you'll double click on the text object, and you'll want to set it to only print when the state equals, or whenever it meets your criteria or your need. So right now it did not show up, or the scale display did not show up at print time. But now this time, let's go ahead and print preview again. And this time, let's actually select Louisiana. And let's see if we get our scale. So it should be connecting at this point, and we do see it there. And then we go to preview, and then we actually have the weight. Okay, and then we selected something other than Louisiana, and it didn't print the object, nor did it show us the option for the scale. And this scale is just for examples purpose as well. I mean, it could be just a whole nother set of drop downs or a whole nother set of text input boxes that just lets you control your printing process that much more there. That actually does conclude our session there, and we're right under the hour mark, so we're right on there. So for those remaining that still have questions, we'll go ahead and get them taken care of now. And if you're leaving us there, then I'd like to thank you for joining us today and hope you guys have a good rest of your day. Jasper, whenever you're ready there, go ahead and start reading them off.
Okay, it looks like the first question we got here is for nested queries. In your particular example, once you selected the state, does the city dropdown show only cities in LA or all cities in the spreadsheet?
Right, so it is a query. So what you have to think about is you have to select valid values for both. So if we pick a city in a state where it does not exist, then we're going to get the error message that the value does not exist or that the record does not exist where it meets both of those criterias. For your particular scenario in city and state, you just want to make sure that you select valid entries for both queries.
Okay. Can data be written to the data source using the data entry form?
Yes, absolutely. So the whole principle, almost if you will, of having that data entry form is that you link these controls that you see here and that you design, and you link those back to data sources on your label format. And those data sources can be inside barcodes or inside text objects, and that allows you, those controls allow you to populate those data sources.
Okay. Can we select and display images from a database on the form?
So there's a specific way that you would want to set that up if you have like, let's say you have a drop down that you want to select images from. So you can have the name of the images in the database. So for example, picture 1, picture 2, picture 3. And then what you're going to want to do is for that particular object on your label, you're going to want to point it to the directory that is containing or that contains all your images. So then when you go to print time, the behavior is going to be is you're going to have like a drop down or you're going to have a text input box. And then whatever value you start typing in there or you select from that particular drop down, that's the image that's going to print on your label format. So you're not going to see a control that allows you to directly link into the database with an image, but there is a way to do that so that you're able to select the image you need at print time.
Okay. When you have multiple forms, can you show data collected on previous forms or on the last form before printing?
The way that you would do that, or you would get like a similar behavior, is you want to create an image on your data entry form, and you want to set the image to be the preview of the format. So what that does is as you go through your form, and this is a live update, you're typing stuff into your different text input boxes, you're checking things on your radio boxes. So what's going to happen is you're going to see a live update or a live preview of the form as you go through them.
Next question. Are data entry forms tied to the document level or can they be tied to individual templates, such as documents that print from one of the two templates based upon data values and the data entry form may be different based upon the template selected?
All the controls on your data entry form, they're not linked to a specific template. So let's say you do have multiple templates. You have a starting template, your body template, and your end of job template. And that's the way that you have it set up. You're never going to associate any of the controls on the data entry form to any of the templates. You're actually going to associate them to these specific data sources. So it's going to be the objects or the text object or the barcode that's within that template that you're going to link back to the form, not a specific template itself.
Okay. Will 2016 be able to import files created in version 9, or is there a particular cutoff?
Good question. So you will be able to open your older label formats. So if you do have some labels that were made in version 9.2 and you want to open them in BarTender 2016, you are able to open them up. So now the only thing to be wary about is if you want to go back to 9.0, you're going to have to hit File, Save As, and downsave those label formats. And in doing so, if you're using any of the features that are available in 2016 that were not in 9.0, you're going to have to forfeit that and strip those features away so that you can open that label in 9.0.
Okay, it looks like that's all the questions we've gotten so far.
All right, thank you, Jasper.
All right, well, I'd just like to thank everybody for attending. I hope you learned how to use some of the data entry form features of BarTender 2016. Have a great rest of your day, guys.